Uh, I grew up in France from North African immigrant parents. In high school, I was obsessed with the French resistance in World War II. There was one question that tormented me. During the Nazi occupation of France, would I have been a member of the French resistance or a collaborator with the Nazi regime? For context, only 2 to 3% of French people were part of the resistance. For me, that meant that 97% of French people collaborated in some ways with the Nazis. Of course, I knew that all of them did not actively collaborate with the Nazis, but most of them chose to obey, to comply, and they stayed silent. 97% of French people were on the wrong side of history. I kept asking myself, would I have been better than 97% of my fellow citizens? Would I have been on the right side of history? You see, I thought that being a French resistant or being a collaborator had to do with the kind of person we truly are. I was scared to wake up one morning and discover that I was the kind of person who would collaborate with the Nazis. I felt anxious, powerless, and so lonely, especially because my father is the human rights activist. He spent 30 years fighting against a corrupt dictatorship. I knew that my father would have been on the right side of history because he was already on the right side of history. So now, 15 years later, I am an educator. I teach French language, Francophone cultures, and social and emotional skills at an elementary school. I love teaching because it makes me a better person. When I teach something to my students, I learn and I deepen the skills I'm teaching. And really, teaching taught me that we can always learn to be the person we want to be. So obviously now the way I ask this question has changed. Instead of would I have joined the French resistance or been a collaborator with the Nazi regime, I ask myself, what skills do I need to learn and practice in order to be the person I want to be? And most importantly, what skills can we all learn and practice and teach our children so instead of 2 to 3% of people joining the resistance, they will be 97%. After the murder of George Floyd, I heard a lot of my coworkers and community members just have kind of the same kind of discomfort I had when I was 16 or 17. They too had many tormenting questions. Had we been silent and complicit? How do we stand up against systemic racism? How do we use our voice for justice? And how do we teach our children to do that? Before this summer, I was introducing anti-racism in my curriculum through content. I'm an elementary teacher, so it's songs, books, movies. The goal was for my students to discover and respect other cultures, have a fair representation of human diversity, and know a little bit about the history of colonialism. I thought that especially at the elementary level, content was enough. But this summer, I realized that my coworkers, my community members, and I needed a framework and a set of skills we could learn and teach our students and children in order to speak up for justice. Anti-racism, and more generally, the ability to use our voice and stand up in difficult situations has had to be treated as any other fundamental skill. It had to be taught. Because I realized that most of us have good intentions, but we don't know what actions to take to contribute at our own level and in our own way to the end of systemic racism. So I looked at the definition of anti-racism, and I'm going to share my screen. So if you allow me a second here, this way all of us will see this. So here's a definition of anti-racism. Anti-racism is the active process of identifying, voicing rejection of, and dismantling racism by changing policies, behaviors, and beliefs that perpetrate racist ideas and actions. So anti-racism is often mistakenly understood as the passive state of not being racist, when according to its definition, it is an active state that involves self-reflection, awareness, and action. So looking at this definition of anti-racism, I identified 5 habits we can model and teach our children and students to give them and give us the skills needed to speak up for justice. These 5 habits are: habit 1, growing and controlling your voice. So for children, in order for them to speak up for justice, they will learn to first advocate for themselves in a way that helps them meet their needs. And this one, I have to say, is my personal nemesis. I have so much more to learn about this one, and still an everyday challenge. Habit 2, holding space for other voices. Children will learn to be aware of the voices around them and understand when it is best not to use their voice, but to actively listen. Habit 3, self-reflecting on the power of your voice. Children will learn to self-reflect on their identity, their class, their ideas and actions, and to understand the legacy of their cultural groups and history. Habit 4, including the unheard voices. Children will learn to research and to be curious about the lives of the people they don't see and they don't hear in their everyday lives. And finally, habit 5, using your voice for justice. Children will learn to feel empowered to, and how best each of them can use their voice and act in difficult situations. So as you can see, each habit has the word voice in it. And it's because for me, our voice represents our power. By helping, I'm just gonna stop sharing, by helping children find, grow, understand, and use their voice positively for themselves, their communities, and the world, we allow them to reach their full potential. I created the 5 habits for my elementary students. I developed a chart of educational practices and tools educators and parents can use in order to integrate the values of awareness, empathy, and courage into everyday life. I first called these habits the 5 habits of anti-racism, but I quickly realized that they are more than that. They are the answer to my teenage self's tormenting question. They are the skills I can acquire to be my best self, the version of myself who will always speak up for justice and would have been without any doubt part of the French resistance. So now my goal is to take these 5 habits everywhere and help everyone, especially teachers, educators, parents, grandparents, model them and teach them to children so each of us can contribute at our own level to the end of systemic racism. And because I know that together we can soon have a culture of 97% of people being on the right side of history. Thank you so much for coming and for listening.